Now, let me see if I can take notes and just postpone my breakfast a bit. So I'm going to heat up a little coffee and then we will start. All right, my coffee is hot. We're ready to go. Welcome to the CBOR interim call. Let me flip over to the agenda here. Oh, great. I just got a junk phone call. Okay. First thing on the agenda is, going over document status. I do need to, we've published another RFC, just came out the other day. I need to check with Christian about which of us is shepherding the CDDL more control. I believe it's going to be me, and it's on me at this point to do the shepherd write-up then and get that out to the IESG.
We do have a shepherd write-up.
Sorry?
We do have a shepherd write-up.
Well, then maybe Christian is, because I know I didn't do it, so maybe Christian is doing it.
AJ did it.
Oh, AJ. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, I will double check that and then flip the right bits to get it going.
Great.
So yeah, it's just that's the only thing that's holding that up is the chairs taking action. So then the next thing on the agenda is to discuss the ABNF issues in EDN literals, and then we have an item about application profiles in CDE, and I believe that's all we have on the agenda today. Karsten, you had some slides. What is that for the ABNF issues?
Well, it's my usual consolidated deck, so
yes. So go ahead and
move on to slide number 5.
Where do I approve that? There we go.
Okay, so the slides begin with explaining the difference between EDN and CDDL and CBOR itself. I think given today's audience, we can skip that. Let me just quickly remind people what this EDN literals document is about. So EDN is a notation, a human readable tool processable notation for CBOR instances that is not binary, so it can be used on a whiteboard, and it can be used in diagnostics, in visualizers, and so on. And there was a little problem with EDN for a long time because it's not really matching CBOR in one aspect. So it was essentially based or inspired by JSON. Every JSON text also is an EDN text. The problem is JSON is not extensible, but CBOR is extensible. So CBOR has a pretty heavy extension mechanism called tags. So EDN didn't quite match the way we are using the CBOR in various places. And for instance, this is always a problem when we do COSI work because we have all these giant pieces of things going in there that make COSI examples hard to read. So the idea behind EDN literals was to add a simple but smooth form of extensibility to EDN. And we did this, and we had a nice draft that was ready for working group last call. But then people mentioned, oh, by the way, if you actually touch EDN, how about adding ABNF to that? And doing a few more cleanups that probably were a good idea. So the objective was really to transmogrify it into having a document that you simply can reference when talking about EDN. And you don't have to talk about the two documents that currently define EDN together, but you can reference this, and it contains everything that's needed, but it's not self-contained in the sense that it's a complete roll-up of the other documents, even though we are getting closer to that. So that's the background. That's what we have been trying to do. And the observation, again, is that tags are an extension point in CBOR, and it's actually an extension point that is really optimized for ease of adding something to CBOR. So it's kind of inverse to the JSON situation where you cannot extend it all. We wanted to make it really easy for people to do tag extensions. And we noticed that it's just not so useful to write a diagnostic output in a way that you just dump the raw contents of those tags. You actually want to do some semantic processing and show information in a way that it's easier to read. And of course, when you write your examples, you want to use easy to write mechanism as well. So let me just finish this slide one. The idea was to mirror this extreme ease of use from the tags to the diagnostic notation and have plugins for various literal formats that are useful. And the document contains two such pluggable formats just to illustrate what's going into such a pluggable format. We could also take them out and put them into a different document if that helps going forward. So we looked at the syntax for the existing EDN, and we found a nice victim, which is the prefix single quote text single quote syntax, and that worked quite well with the examples that we were trying to come up with. So that's really the point of this document. And we used the opportunity to do some general cleanup and also to increase the usability of the extended diagnostic notation, where Joe has collected a set of usability requirements that are not fulfilled by JSON, and we liberally used that list and added a few things like making comments a little bit simpler and things like that. Well, JSON doesn't have comments at all, but we also had some that are difficult to use in certain situations. So this was all put in there, and it's done. The other thing that came was a request to have ABNF. In RFC 1749, we decided not to have ABNF because we didn't want to give the impression to anyone that CBOR is a text-based interchange format. It's not. It's a binary interchange format, but it's still useful to have a text-based form, but maybe interchanging and validating and so on is not that high on the list of things that is of importance for EDN. So we didn't include it in 7049 and we didn't include it in 8949. But yeah, people still said, folks, we would like to have that. And I must admit, my implementation actually has benefited from having this ABNF available, because the ABNF can be transformed into half of the parser. So this is really useful. Now Rohan has a question.
Hi. Hello, everybody. I don't have a question. I was going to say that I think that you're conflating tags as an extension point for CBOR and app strings as an extension point for further decoding of B strings. So you're talking about basically type extensions rather than tag extensions. Not all tags use B strings that need further decoding, and not all app strings are necessarily needed inside of the context of a tag.
Yeah, I was trying to point this out in my point number 3. We just chose that byte string syntax. You could have used a completely different syntax. The main point was it's pluggable, and we have something that we can register, like the prefix here. So the byte string syntax just was an easy way to do this. You could have done it in a different way. And that may be part of the confusion here, that we actually
I think part of the
byte string syntax.
I think the confusion is that you guys have never documented your requirements. So the requirements are implicit, and they seem to, like we had a requirement for no ABN, for no specification of EDN and no ABNF, and now we have a requirement for ABNF. But yeah, so anyway, I will let you continue. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, we could have done a requirements document, but requirements documents are currently not very high on the list of priorities in the IETF. And for instance, Joe's list of usability requirements was really useful, but there's no need to have an agreement in the working group on those requirements. We just have to think about them and come up with a response as a working group. So let me carry on here, because we have limited time. So the example that I really would like to show here, and that actually shows that not everything here is about tags, and you're right in mentioning that one. We quickly, after defining EDN literals and having a datetime and an IP extension, we quickly decided it would be good to have a mechanism for accessing CDDL information. So this is the E extension, which can be used to work on an example during a time when you don't have your code point allocations yet. So you can write an example that will stay valid, that will stay correct while the code point allocations are still being worked out. So the text within the E is just a CDDL name. And you need a CDDL modules to actually map this text to the numbers, the code points that you actually want to use. So we wrote that up quickly and combined it with another item, which is also interesting for examples in documents where we have these binary blobs that we really would like to reference instead of copying them each time. So this is the ref thing, but I'm going to talk about E for the moment. Now, the interesting thing about E is that this is an extension. It's not part of EDN base, it's an extension. And what the syntax within the E is entirely depends on the syntax of CDDL. It's not the job of EDN to specify the syntax of CDDL. It's the job of CDDL to do that. So at the time when I wrote the text, I didn't even think about providing ABNF for this, because there is no point. The string that is in the single quotes actually will be presented to some code that will look it up in the CDDL module, and if it finds it there, then it's fine. If it doesn't find it there, then it's a mistake. So you don't even need to validate that thing, because either it is in the list of names or it is not in the list of names. And if we actually ever change the syntax of CDDL names, we would have a deployability issue by not having that reflected in any implementation that just copied the CDDL syntax for this. The implementation should not validate that name. And that's maybe a little bit surprising, but I wasn't aware of that either. But when I thought about this again, I found out why I didn't provide an ABNF and why it actually would be counterproductive to provide an ABNF here. One.
Yeah. So if first of all, CDDL is an RFC. So if you change and this is only referring to an ID, a CDDL ID. So this is a pretty fundamental part of CDDL. If you change it, it's going to have major backwards compatibility repercussions. I'm also going to push back on the idea that there's no value in this, in having a syntax for a CDDL name in the definition of an E app string, because if you want to implement code coloring, syntax linting, any kinds of things that you put in an IDE, well, you need to know what the syntax is in order to do something sensible with it. It's basically two. I mean, I went and posted this. It's 2 lines. It's not hard. So.
Yeah, the lines are in 8610. You can find them there. You don't need to copy them.
But it's useful to copy it, because if you're saying the specification of this app string is that it has a particular, it has a particular semantics, and it's also useful to say what the syntax is, because if you want to do code coloring, if you want to do syntax linting, then it's useful. So, I mean, it's basically like I hear you saying, I want to have a specification, but I don't want to do the work to have a specification.
The work has been done. So if you want to do syntax coloring of CDL names, then CDL names should have a structure. Right now, they don't.
And so what you're saying is you want to have a place where you can have, a bunch of extensions to EDN app strings, and you want it to be easier for the extension, for writers of potential extensions, than for implementers of EDN.
Well, for the implementer, it's really easy to not validate that thing. That's the easiest possible situation for an implementer, not having the code there at all.
I mean, I don't think that's particularly useful, but I will let the next person in queue go.
Christian, with chair hat off, as will probably be for the rest of this meeting too. I do see that there are applications where it's useful to have an integrated ABNF, but at the same time, there are many applications where it's more useful to rely on the fact that there will be a consistent ABNF that they can then apply nested parsing to. And frankly, from the implementations that I've seen and worked with, the latter is the more prominent. And sure, there will be for the cases of syntax highlighting, one can be transformed into the other, and the other can be transformed into the one. And if that transformation can be done in an automated way, or fine, please point me to the tools, but I haven't seen those tools yet. And at the same time, I do expect that many authors of the extensions will not be ABNF experts. Sure, we do have the experts here now that we are doing something in the RFC2B for this, but this is basically an open I don't know, expert review required or something registration. So people will add things there, and as the experts would need very hard vetting to make sure that a dual layer thing is still consistent, and I don't see how that will be conveniently done. And even if it were done, it's still then up to some implementers that for which the two-layer approach is more convenient to just discard all that work. So yeah, that's my 2 cents here.
Okay, so the next example I have is the CIA extension that is supposed to support the href extension in core, and that's a bit of a similar situation. So right now we do have ABNF in the document, and I'm increasingly wondering whether that's a good idea, because the definition of what a URI is changing. And right now we again have a change. RFC 6874 is still in force, but pretty much dead. So we need to think about how to handle this. I don't have the answer here right now, what the best way is to handle this. But I would say that requiring ABNF to be fixed in the specification for every application extension would not be the right thing to do. So the idea with application extension literals was that the detailed syntax comes from the domain of the extension. If it's a tag, it's a tag, like in CI, or sometimes it's not, like in E. But the domain is that part that defines what the literal syntax is. And restating the domain-specific information in the EDN application extension creates a problem. And that's maybe something that hasn't fully made it into the minds of all people who do documents in the IETF. But the restatement always is a liability, because you make mistakes, you cause ossification, and so on. And therefore, restating things is generally wrong. And the application extension literal mechanism of EDN provides a firewall between the initial syntax validation of the EDN and any application-specific processing that may be required. Right.
Yeah. So this assertion that using some externally referenced ABNF is going to, that not using that and rewriting the ABNF is going to cause errors. I think that's provably wrong. So my experience has been that the older an ABNF is, the more likely it is that it has numerous errors. So very specifically, when I wrote the ABNF for the reference app string, for the ref app string, that ABNF, it has a bunch of errors in it, and it has a bunch of unused productions. Not a bunch of errors, but it has a bunch of unused productions, and it didn't actually, adapting that to work with the two-layer ABNF system, or the one-layer ABNF system, most of the work was fixing the ABNF. Making it work with a single layer ABNF from that point on was trivial. I just needed to find an occurrence of a single quote in one production and remove it. That was all. So the statement that you're making is not borne out by the evidence.
Christian?
Just brief question to what you're saying. Is there a tool that can do this, find a single quote transformation?
This is work of spec edit. We're at the IETF. We write specifications. This is our job. We should be doing this. Implementers should not have to go and do this. If we're not doing this right, shame on us. The ISD should not approve documents that don't have humans that actually go and do this work properly. But if you're asking about the tool to evaluate a BNF that has been created, if we write a single line ABNF, we can run it through tools. And Joe Hildebrand, he has a bunch of tools, right? So he hit me up with a particular problem that he had, and I went and fixed the ABNF to make that work, right? This is how this process should be working. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Christian, but basically this.
You didn't, because we write this specification, and this specification happens to have one or two application-oriented literals in there. But if those application extension literals work anything like tags do, and that is what we've seen in the sense of uptake by users, then the specifications for the extension for the entries into those extensions will not be written by us, but will be written by people where the expert review might be some firewall against something going terribly wrong. But things will be registered that are plain odd.
Okay, so I'm trying to unpack what you're saying. So you're saying in the case of E, somebody has written something that's not a valid CDDL ID. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that someone will come up with some application extension literal, say foobar, yes, describe correctly what they're meaning, and then follow whichever path we take for this document and write the ABNF for it. And that will not be a consensus document. That will be a document that at best gets expert review. Okay. And that's an external document. And if we are in the two-layer approach, then worst thing that happens is that the ABNF there does not actually represent what their prose is telling. But if we are taking the one-layer approach and someone takes the ABNF and pulls it into the big ABNF of a diagnostic notation, all of a sudden that diagnostic notation language becomes inconsistent.
Yeah, but that's just one problem with several. Sorry.
So I'm trying to follow the conversation. I think Christian just explained what I was cued to ask, but I thought we were discussing the sort of two-layer ABNF in relation to the EDN literals document, but this is now where we're talking about it in the context of the EDN EREF document. Is that correct?
That was one example, which is both the CGL names and URIs have existing ABNF. So it's pretty obvious. These are examples that demonstrate what kind of work would be needed to put the application-oriented extension into the base ABNF syntax.
Okay, so just a clarifying question then. So we're discussing whether extensions should have complete ABNF or they shouldn't have complete ABNF. Is that what we're? So give me a higher level summary of what we're talking about here.
but I don't know.
All right, so let's pop to Pete, and because I think Pete can say something to what Ori just asked. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, you don't need to put a complete. And by the way, is this particular device working because I had to switch?
It is.
Okay. You don't have to put a complete ABNF in any extension. What you do have to do is say define my new stuff, and then in the case of app strings, say app string equals or my new stuff. So you have one additional line of ABNF to put in to make it consistent and complete with the one layer model. That's all you have to do. And if this is going to get expert review, as Christian indicated, and someone fails to put in that little extra bit of syntax, then it can simply be added. And that will solve the problem.
So Rohan, go ahead.
Yeah. So Christian said he brought up this use case where somebody writes an app string, they write a document, it's expert reviewed, it has some ABNF in it that's wrong, that doesn't match what their prose says, and then somebody else goes and takes that. So first of all, there was an error in our process that nobody, there were no test cases, or that the expert reviewer didn't test the ABNF to make sure that it didn't do something bad. Okay, accidents happen. But then an implementer took that and added it, and something bad happened. So in order for them to not have bad things, so it's like, oh, whoops, that didn't work. Now let me just go and remove this app string and things will work again. That an implementer takes some app string that somebody else created that was not a consensus document until the ABNF is fixed. This doesn't seem like a terrible thing.
So I was not talking about a case where the ABNF is obviously broken so that the syntax checker will fail, because that is an obvious case. I was talking about a case where the ABNF is failing to limit the app string to what the generic case of an app string would match. So, for example, that app string terminates earlier. And that is something you don't notice immediately. That is something you only notice when you get offending data, potentially malicious data, that then is suddenly interpreted differently. And as long as there is one consistent, one single rule for how to parse the outer app string, then the fallout of something like that is limited to inside the app string with all the escapes properly processed. But if the extension gets added at the same, say, permission level, picking up Carsten's firewall terminology, if it's in the same permission zone, then all of a sudden its impact can spread across the single colon single quote boundaries of the app string.
So you said, if you want to do, you should, the expert reviewer should do some syntax checking, right? We can trivially put some test vectors in to test for the kind of problem that you described.
Can we? I'm not convinced we can do that easily.
I mean, we can put in things that make sure that no known app string fails the syntax of an unknown app string. Right, there are a variety of ways we can do that.
If there are the tools for that, so be it, and my application will just ignore those extra app strings. But that tooling should be well described and understood by all the experts that are working on it. And it needs to make sure that every expanded app string can only match precisely a subset of what the generic app string can match. If we have tools for that, Like, so I'm kind of fine with it.
Well, I'm not. In software, we have a concept called coupling. And what this discussion was just a specific instance of was generic observation that creating coupling, in particular between parts of a piece of software that evolve on different timelines, is always a big problem. And yes, we can build such a tool. We can modulo the undecidability problems, but we probably can work around them using heuristics. And we can find people who keep those alive and so on. But it's all unnecessary. There is no point. So if we properly decouple the extensions from the base specification, then we don't have that problem. And much more important, we take away a serious threshold that might stop somebody who's trying to do an application-oriented extension into EDN, that might stop them from actually getting it standardized. Registered, actually, not standardized.
Okay, Pete?
And I think I made this comment in Vancouver. What the conflation of software implementation with specification is a mistake, right? There is no reason you can't do that decoupling in software and still have the specification use the correct specification language. You could use a different specification language than ABNF that more closely reflected the way you wanted to implement, but that ain't ABNF. And ease of implementation for a single pass is going to be more easily done with correct ABNF and a little harder to do the decoupling that Karsten's talking about. Not impossible. Not even, as far as I'm concerned, that hard. And so I think this conflation of the particular specification language and how we're going to implement it is just a red herring. And you know, if you want to move to a different specification language because it has some more features that you like, great. Just don't do it in ABNF.
So Karsten, before you get in, one thing I would like to hear is why the coupling issue, the complexity for spec writers and writing extensions issue is a problem with what Pete described, where you just add the extension as another ABNF statement, another ABNF blob that does not directly tie into the original. So go ahead, Karsten.
Yeah, first of all, I need to destroy that red herring there. I'm not talking about implementation here. I'm talking about general principles of designing software, and specifications are code. So general observations about coupling do apply to specifications as well. So why would we want to do this? If I were advising someone who actually has to put in ABNF, even though they don't want to, I would just advise them to use exactly the ABNF that is currently in the document, because it gives them the decoupling they need to run their specification. And that's obviously not particularly useful. So it nominally provides the ABNF and even can be used in the line of ABNF that Pete just wrote into the chat. But we might as well do this globally and not have that problem at all. Let me just explain something I didn't explain on the previous slide because I thought we didn't have time. So the CRI document, the href document, currently has ABNF in it. And that is probably a mistake. But what we definitely couldn't use is the ABNF from PR49, because that actually changes the URI syntax. So a processor that actually generates EDN for CRIs would have some processing to change the URIs in such a way that it actually fits into that syntax. And that's one of those unintended consequences of having too much coupling that I would like to get rid of by using the original design.
So I just want to go back to the previous point that somehow specifications are code. That's a nice assertion, but it's false. Absolutely false. Code is a different sort of thing, and code requires mapping onto an actual implementation language. And that is not the case, particularly with ABNF, which has, in loads of instances, shift reduce errors and everything else that goes with actually having to convert from a formal specification to real code that's implementable. So that's clearly not the case. As far as the ease of adding the app string or, equals or my new stuff, I don't understand how this is in any way difficult and how it increases complexity. It certainly increases the consistency of the ABNF and the implementability for a whole host of possible implementations.
Hey, so the Carsten you just said that Carsten just said that this changes the URI ABNF. So it restricts one character from being allowed in various parts of the ABNF, which can continue to be expressed using an existing valid part of the syntax. So it just says that if you could construct a URI that has a bare single quote in it in various parts of the URI. And now you have to express that with percent encoding. This does not seem to be a, this is not a catastrophe. This is not hard to implement. I don't see that this is like this is something that makes life harder for implementers compared to basically making them go and rifle through an arbitrary number of ABNFs and have to integrate it themselves. I can go and integrate an ABNF because I've worked with ABNF, but making implementers who want to go and implement a single layer ABNF or want to do a single layer PEG have to go and do this work. This is a lot of work for implementers that you are putting on them by having this 2-layer system. As Pete said, if you want to do a 2-layer system, you can implement a 2-layer system. No problem. Go for it. With a single layer ABNF.
Carsten?
Yeah, apologies for laughing out loud. I didn't notice that I was not muted. Yeah, we do a little bit damage to the URIs. We cannot use single quotes, and single quotes are not used a lot in URIs anyway. That's exactly This is the kind of thing I would like to avoid. So there is no point in changing the URI syntax just to have a single level implementation. And Christian's example from IETF 120 that you don't integrate your URI parser into your JSON just because URIs can occur in JSON strings, that really applies. You really want to have this separation of concern. And yeah, so the fact that this is easily repairable with URIs is just happenstance. So we have the percent encoding in URIs, so we can repair the single quote thing, even if it's pretty much invasive, because you have to fully understand the URI before you actually can do that. Again, avoid decoupling and you're golden. Since the queue is empty, I might go to the next slide.
Sure, go ahead. But let's try to keep this to the discussion of what to do about the ABNF here. We've spent a lot of time on other explanations.
Yeah, so basically the ABNF that is in there at the moment looks pretty much like this. That's all we need in the base spec. I have another slide that slightly modifies this. But this is basically what it does now. It has a full decoupling between the content of those single quoted strings and the syntax around it that makes use of that. So by defining a way for an application extension to specify the syntax of what is actually allowed in the application extension, this can be done in a pluggable way. So for instance, for the CRIs, we simply would reference the IRA reference syntax. Now, Rohan is right that most of those dusty decks are broken. So we might want to supply a fixed IRA reference syntax with the document, but we probably would still make that in such a way that it's useful for other places that need a fixed IRA reference syntax. Barry.
Go back to the previous slide, please, with the current ABNF. There we go. Now, what I want to push on, when I look at this and when I look at the ABNF that Pete suggested on the mailing list, which I do believe is more correct from an ABNF point of view, I don't understand the objection to switching to it. When I look at this and when I look at that, I see them being essentially compatible from the point of view of building an implementation, but the suggestion from Pete closes the holes in how ABNF is specified that I think is appropriate. I think it's better ABNF. So what is the objection to that? Why is that bad?
I don't know who you're asking, but for me it's bad because it means that the syntax for the application extension needs to be transmogrified in such a way to do the work of the single quoted string in this specification. So you have to do all the escape processing, which actually goes on because escapable is another rule that is defined further below. Just took the most important parts here. So every single application extension has to do that work. For instance, by disallowing single quotes and backslashes, which is one way of solving that problem. That may not always what you actually want to do. So there are different ways of doing this. But the point is, if I make any mistake here, then I have damaged the base syntax. And why not leave this, the syntax of the application extension in its original state without modifying it, and use the two-step approach, avoiding all these problems.
Okay, so I don't see how Pete's suggestion requires you to do what you just said. I don't see how it requires you to change or damage the what I see as unrelated parts of the ABNF. But I'm done, so let's go on to Christian.
So I'd also like to answer your question on what is what is wrong with just doing that. So as long as you're in the mental model of the two layers, then the app string cannot just contain escaped single quotes, but also, if I'm not wrong, and sorry, I can't look it up right now for lack of working device, other kinds of escapes that evaluate into a character, which under the model of allowing constructs such as tag 999 or parsers that do not understand all the individual app string formats, creates the danger that a general tool might be creating something where, for example, say someone wants to produce diagnostic notation that only contains ASCII characters and not full Unicode, which there may or may not be reasons to. As long as we allow the transformation on the level of a tag 999 or a general or an unaware EDN parser, that parser can just take a single quoted string and, for example, start quoting single characters without changing the semantics of the document. And all those options need to be processed and need to be accounted for in that model where there is something ORed into the app string. And that, I think, is way more complex than just disallowing a single quote and then, for example, starting to percent encode, which, by the way, in kind of luckily for your eyes, percent encoding is an option. But I don't even know off my head whether that can or cannot change the semantics, because I don't know what character class single quote is in 3986 off my head. And that's just a domain that the reviewing experts will know. There will come in a lot of domains where maybe the syntax of the higher level thing is not even specified in ABNF, and that's okay, because that's a different domain and it's a different layer this works on. So I think the danger, just repeat, the danger is that tools work on the general level, produce strings, and then all of a sudden they are not understood by tools that are working with the /equals version.
Rowan?
Sorry, took a little while to unmute. Yeah, so what Karsten said, or before Christian, was that he's trying to say this work of, if you want to do a single ABNF, because he dislikes having this coupling at the syntax level, that anybody that wants to use, or that is compelled because of their choice of language, to use a single layer ABNF, or a single layer, if they're using NOM or PEG on various programming languages, and they want to do something efficiently, they have to go do the work to go and take the top level ABNF and the syntax for each individual app string just to get the syntax person to work themselves. They have to go do this work of consolidating this. I think this is wrong. This is pushing work. This is, we're a standards developing organization. We're saying that effectively what he is saying is that the convenience of someone who writes who extends the EDN specification with a new app string is more important than somebody who is implementing EDN. And that just feels so incredibly wrong to me. So if we think about who the spec writers, somebody who would be extending EDN, if they want to extend EDN, they've got access to experts. Right? A typical implementer is not going to be like, I'm trying to consolidate these 6 ABNFs here. Could somebody please help me? Like, this isn't really, this isn't really related to specifying a new thing. So maybe this isn't your job. This just feels very lazy on our part and not beneficial to the community, where the number of implementers of EDN, I hope, is going to greatly outnumber the number of extenders of new app strings.
Okay, realizing we only have 4 minutes left, let's try to keep it tight and give me a minute or two at the end to wrap something up. Go ahead, Pete.
Sorry, I was typing. Okay, so I just had the aha that if you noticed in the chat room. So the expectation here, which is not written in the document as far as I can tell, is that any implementation of this must parse twice. Not just double layer, like you get a set of tokens and then you take those tokens and put them through another parser, but that you in fact make sure that it meets the requirements of the first parse and then send each thing back through to get a second parse to get your actual tokens. That's a truly interesting implementation choice, and maybe an implementation choice that you all want to make, but that is not this specification. I'm baffled by the thought that you could use ABNF to accomplish this. This is running the ABNF parser twice and reusing some of the same names in hope that you'll catch the subparts. If you all want to implement ABNF that way, that's peachy. But do not use the ABNF itself to try and represent that particular implementation model. And this explains, and I didn't get all of why Rowan was distressed about this. This explains why it's so hard for his implementation, is if you need to do a single pass implementation, or it's most convenient for you to do so, then you have to figure out this additional syntax instead of it being specified in the ABNF. Okay, I now get it, and it makes it worse as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Carsten, last word for a minute, and I have something to say.
So, Pete, it's great that you find this out. 10 years ago, we had this discussion, or a little bit more than 10 years ago, we had this discussion in one of the HTTP working groups, and this is essentially why we, in the end, decided to have the way RFC 8288 uses ABNF. And the same reasons that made that the right thing and made the way we had been using ABNF before in RFC 6690 the wrong thing. That applies here. But that's a discussion that happened 10 years ago. So I'm a little bit bored by it. Of course, yes, we may have to repeat it, but it's a discussion that had a very clear outcome that I just took for granted here.
Okay, I'd like to do something here. I mean, I think there's relatively few of us who are involved in this discussion, and we're kind of thrashing about it. What I'd like to do is see if Pete and Carsten, can you act as a design team and go off by yourselves and sort this out a bit more and see if you can come to something that you can both live with. I'm not sure you can. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But I'd like you to try and report back on the next call or on the mailing list in between. And let's see if we can get this, get something that neither side is saying.
We can
doesn't
make an
work.
attempt. We
Yeah.
can make an attempt, but I think you see where this divergence happens.
I do. But I think the two of you are reasonable people, and the two of you both have the goal of making a good spec. And I think with those two things going for us, maybe you can sort out some way that you can, like I said, come up with something that maybe you both aren't thrilled with, but that you can both live with. Are you willing to try that?
Yeah,
can
I
set up.
would acknowledge that this is difficult because we don't even have a common language, as we just
Yes.
found out.
Right. But that's why I think if the two of you are just sort of on the phone with each other, you can work that part out, where it's a little harder on with a bunch of people watching and taking notes and stuff. So
We can give it a go and set up a little phone call or video chat and see if we can hone in on something.
okay.
Yep.
Worst case is we come back and we say, nope, we're still deadlocked, and then it becomes the chairs and the AD's problem.
Yes. That will ultimately be it. So, okay, well then that's the outcome of this. And Lawrence, I'm sorry that we didn't get to your item. We will push that to the next call if that's okay with you. You said it wasn't a rush, so.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for being accommodating. All right, then we are past time, so we're done here for today, and we'll see you on the mailing list and in 2 weeks.